Alright, so now let's take an objective look at what's going on with the housing market and where we might be headed from here based on data and science. Okay, there's actually no science, but let's talk about the data. In the last few months, the yield on the 10 and 30-year treasuries have started going up due to increased concerns of inflation, and that in turn has continued to push mortgage rates higher. That just means that as mortgages get more expensive, buyers are able to purchase less house, and that in turn might bring down housing prices. But no, that's not happening. Prices keep getting pushed back up for two main reasons, and the first is that housing inventory keeps getting lower. We're at the lowest level of housing inventory ever in history. Like for reference, in March of 2017, there were almost 1.3 million homes active on the market, but today there are only 493,000. That means with less inventory, buyers are forced to compete for whatever's left over, and that in turn drives prices higher. And second, with interest rates going up, buyers are rushing in right now to lock in a low interest rate while they still can. The expectation today is that over the next few years, mortgage rates are going to get more expensive than they are today. So if you want to buy something, you better do that sooner than later so you don't miss out. Well, that is of course bound to rise prices even higher. Now, from a numbers standpoint though, in terms of the foreclosure crisis, things are actually improving. Even though it's definitely super spooky to see articles claiming that 2.5 million homeowners are still in mortgage forbearance, that number has been steadily declining over the last 9 months, and it's fallen for the first time ever below 5%, which by the way represents the 4th straight week of a decline. This is a really good sign that homeowners are getting back on their feet, they're making their payments again, or they just took mortgage forbearance out of an abundance of caution because why not, and now they're making their payments again. However, all of that excess demand to buy a home ended up pushing up homeowner equity by $26,000 across the US in the last 3 months of 2020, meaning that chances are if you own a home right now, you've probably just made a lot of money over this last year. This also means that the likelihood of a home actually going into foreclosure today is relatively slim. That's because generally only homes without any equity go into foreclosure. Otherwise, it would be way better for the homeowner just to sell the home, rake in some fat profits, and then just move on. Well, of course, when it comes to this, it was found that only 2.8% of all properties with a mortgage were in negative equity, which is where a homeowner owes more on the home than what it's worth. And so even though you have 2.5 million homeowners in forbearance, less than 3% of those people are in actual risk of a foreclosure. And so as it stands right now, interest rates are still historically low. Inventory is still incredibly low. Homeowners have more equity than ever before, and a surge of demand is the perfect storm to keep pushing prices even higher. But when it comes to my own thoughts on this as both a real estate agent and real estate investor, and whether or not something like this is actually sustainable with a 40-year mortgage, here's what I think. Based on the numbers, I don't think there's going to be a mass foreclosure crisis based on the data that there's just not that much to foreclose on. Like in 2009 during the Great Financial Crisis, that was a different story. Homeowners back then took out adjustable rate mortgages on homes they couldn't afford with 0% down. So really right off the bat, as soon as they closed on the home, they had zero equity. Then when the real estate market tanked, they were completely underwater on their mortgage, having owed more than what the home is actually worth. So really in those situations, foreclosure is the only course of action. Today in 2021 though, that's not so much the case. Like in 2009, 25% of all homes with a mortgage were underwater. And like I mentioned, today that number is only 2.8% and dropping. Homeowners today do not have adjustable rate mortgages, interest rates are at their lowest level ever, banks are only now lending to the most qualified buyers. And if a homeowner can't make their payment, they could sell right now at top market value and probably make a lot of money. Now the risk is that if interest rates suddenly start to go up and everyone lists their home exactly at the same time, that could absolutely be enough to trigger housing prices to come down. So if either of those factors change, it will have an impact. But realistically, will that happen? Well, I would say probably not both at the exact same time. From what I'm seeing, homeowners don't want to involuntarily sell their home, and if they're behind on their payments, it would just make sense for them to work out a payment plan and stay where they are. Plus, even if they do want to sell, where would they go? Every other area is now just as equally as expensive, so it's a wash in terms of how much money they can make. In addition to that, interest rates would probably continue going up, but I have a feeling it would be a very gradual increase that would give the market enough time to adjust. The problem, however, is that today we've artificially created a lack of inventory by holding back the sale of homes and foreclosures through policies that inadvertently boost up housing prices across the board. Here's another one of my homemade Photoshop sketches of what's going on. If housing is like a river, there's always a constant flow of people selling their homes who can't afford them, who lose their job, whose situation changes, and that supply feeds the market who wants to buy. But as you place mortgage forbearances, stop foreclosures, and allow for 40-year mortgages, what you're doing is placing a dam in the middle of the stream that backlogs supply. So now you have the same amount of buyers, but half of the homes there usually are, driving up the price. Then of course you sprinkle in some low interest rates into the mix, the buyer demand doubles, and now you have what the housing market is today. There's definitely the train of thought that we should just let the markets function as is and let people sell their homes for a 10 to 20% profit if they can no longer afford it. That in turn would help normalize prices and help with the lack of inventory. Although like I mentioned, the counter argument to this is that if we did that, then potentially too many homes would come on the market all at once. And we can't just let all the backlog of inventory overflow into a market that isn't yet ready for it. Otherwise, the worry is that prices would come down too quickly, and the goal here is not to force homeowners out of their home if they were negatively impacted by the illness. There is definitely not an easy fix to this, and it's not like I would just be able to go and say,
lower the zoning requirements and just build more homes.
Because there's really just as much involved as actually implementing that as well. But assuming everything stays exactly on course as is, it's probably going to be another wild ride for real estate this year. It's still too early to see exactly what's going to happen with this proposal, but I have a feeling that the chance of a mortgage servicer extending a loan all the way for 40 years is probably unlikely. And really, as it's written, that's just meant to be the maximum, as though they can't extend it beyond 40 years. We may see banks extending mortgages 5 to 15 years in an effort to lower monthly payments. And maybe even more in special circumstances, but I just can't fathom how they would extend someone's like 10-year loan to a 40-year term just because it was requested. So the best thing that we could do right now is keep a close eye on exactly how this is progressing, and of course, as usual, thank you so much for watching. Until next time.